All right. Hi, boys and girls. All right. The next thing I want to do is have a quick talk with you about friction. Now, we've already defined friction as the force that happens when matter rubs against matter. Usually, friction is what we think of to slow things down. For instance, if you jump out of an airplane, when you jump out of the airplane, you hope your parachute opens. When you first jump out, you're going to be going really, really fast. When you pull the cord on the parachute, then it's going to open up and catch the air and slow you down, right? So the air resistance from the air up against the parachute will start to make you go slower. Friction we normally think about as going slower. When you kick a soccer ball, on a very grassy field, usually it won't go as far because the heavy high grass will slow it down. You really would rather play on turf or on a nice cut field so that you can gauge your kicks better. Now, the thing to think about is that friction is also needed to start you up. The way I always think about this is Scooby Doo and Shaggy. Every time they see a ghost, their feet just start going, and for like 5 seconds, they can't go anywhere. Well, that's what happens when you don't have enough friction, too. You can't get going without enough friction in order to get a good grasp on something, which is why if you play sports, you wear cleats, and why when you go to PE, your teacher always wants you to wear tennis shoes, which are bumpy and rubbery bottoms, which increase the friction so that you can either slow down or speed up, basically, so you have better control over your movement. All right, so that's just kind of a little note to be thinking about that friction is usually for slowing down, but friction is also essential for us to be able to get going. Without any friction at all, you just do like Scooby and Shaggy. Now, on our quick talk about friction, let's take a look at my little handy dandy table that I made. All right, so now you have to be able to wrap your mind around these two ideas of increasing your friction and what happens to the motion when you increase your friction and when you decrease your friction. In the example of the parachute guy or girl jumping out of the plane, when you open the parachute, you're increasing your friction. And what happens to you? Do you speed up or do you slow down? Right, you slow down. So here's the deal with increased friction, it slows down motion. It would be awesome for you to take these notes on some paper too, guys. All right, some kinds of surfaces that would be increasing would be like um, on a on an icy, stormy day to put sand out, right? In fact, that's what they do a lot. The worker guys or girls will throw sand out onto the sidewalks and streets in order to increase the friction, which would slow you down and keep you from falling on the ice. Any kind of bumpy surface would increase your friction and therefore slow you down. All right, let's see. Sandy, bumpy, usually something that's soft and squishy would also increase your friction and slow you down. All right, let's go down and look at decreasing friction. So, for instance, if you are a car mechanic, you would make sure that the car that you're working on has lots of oil on the different moving parts. The oil that's on the different moving parts makes the parts in the car that have to move slide freely without rubbing against each other. It reduces the friction. If you don't have the oil there, then it increases the friction, and increased friction, as you may be aware, adds heat. So when you have too much friction, you can start to make things too hot. And in a car, that's a really bad thing if you overheat your car. So decreasing friction, one way to do it would be to oil something or grease it. Another thing would be to add water. Think about how at school, when somebody has an accident or whatever and they have to use a mop and wipe it up, there's always a little yellow sign over there that tells you to beware, like right to watch out for it. So something that's wet would be increase or decreased friction. Really smooth surfaces would also decrease your friction. Let's see, smooth, water slash wet surfaces, oil or grease, are just some of the ways to decrease the friction. What happens when you decrease the friction? Then you speed up. Now, you pretty much already know this, right? Like you already know that when it comes time to start running on the beach, you're probably going to have a harder time running than if you were running on a track because the sand would be softer and squishier and it would increase the friction for you. Um, you probably already know that when you go into the water and try to walk, it's harder because you have more matter rubbing up against your legs than in the air and it slows you down. Um, those are some things that you kind of already know from your real life, but when you're answering a question about increased and decreased friction, it can be a little bit tricky. So having these notes handy would be